We looked a few weeks ago at the peace of God that we can have as believers. And 2 weeks ago, we looked at the price that was paid to redeem us, the mercy of God, the price paid so that we might have that peace with God and the peace of God. So we've looked at what we have in Christ. And this morning I want to take a little time to look a little bit at it from our side, to look at how do we respond to all of that. So we're looking at worship this morning, as I've said. And I want to read two illustrations to you, two situations, if you like. And then I want to ask you something about them. First of all, I want to tell you about someone called Liz. There may be bits of this that you will think, do you know what sounds familiar to me? I've had days like that. Liz was having a really bad day at work. It all started when one of her colleagues phoned in sick. That put the pressure on from the very start. She had to take on extra jobs when she was already overloaded. Everything had to be ready for the presentation at 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Her stress levels had gone through the roof and had been steadily rising throughout the day. The fact that the photocopier broke down just at the time she needed it didn't help. The last straw came when she heard the news that one of the secretaries had managed to lose the incredibly important piece of paper with all the facts and figures on it that she needed for, guess what, the presentation at 4 o'clock. Without this information, she would look a total fool in front of everybody. Liz was furious. Just as she was about to launch a verbal attack on the secretary, she remembered that morning, when she read her Bible, it had mentioned about God's forgiveness for all the awful things that we had done. And she thought for a moment, well, if God can forgive me for that, maybe I should forgive other folk. So she managed to bite her tongue, and the words that were in her head stayed in her head and didn't come out of her mouth. Second person I want to talk a wee bit about is Tom. Tom's been looking forward to going to church all week. He likes meeting up with everybody, but above all, he loves to sing. He's in church singing at the top of his voice, "I love you, Lord, I lift my voice to worship you. O my soul, rejoice. I will give you all of my worship and all of my praise. You alone I love to worship. You alone are worthy of my praise." Now, my question to you is, which of those two people are worshipping God? Both, yeah. Both of them are worshipping God. The reason I gave those two illustrations is that many people in the world's reaction would be to automatically say, Tom's worshipping. If they thought a bit longer about it, they might come to the conclusion, in a sense, Liz is too. But most people in the world would say Tom's worshipping. You see, the word worship has become most commonly used by both Christians and non-Christians to describe things that happen inside a church building like this on a Sunday morning. We often invite people, come and join us for worship on a Sunday. When I welcomed you this morning, I said, welcome to worship. The danger that's implied here is that worship is only something that happens here on a Sunday morning at 11 o'clock within the walls of this place. Don't get me wrong, that is what we are doing We are here this morning worshipping together. But true worship, I would argue, needs to be so much more than just that. So much more than just what we do here on a Sunday morning. The Bible insists that worship concerns the whole of life. In our two illustrations, Tom may be worshipping God as he sings in the church building, but as you identified, so is Liz as she bites her tongue at work. As we look this morning at what the Bible says and teaches about worship, let's release our thoughts to go beyond just church. Let our thoughts carry us to what you'll be doing Monday morning at 11 o'clock, Saturday night at 9 o'clock at night. We're called to worship God wherever we are at all those times as well. If we truly understand what Scripture teaches us about worship, it should have implications for everything that we do, wherever we are. Our Bible reading this morning from Paul's letter to the Romans, chapter 12, teaches us more about worship. The concept of worship is quite broad in the New Testament. When you study the New Testament, there are 4 different Greek words that are used, that are translated to the English into the word worship in the English. I think it'd be quite helpful just to take a few minutes to look at some of those. I am not going to even attempt to pronounce them in the Greek. I don't speak Greek, and it wouldn't end well. So the first one, that word is the Greek word is most frequently translated as worship in the New Testament. It literally means to come forward and kiss. It was to describe the practice of falling down before a superior to your feet and kissing their feet or kissing the hem of their robe. Our English word prostration comes from that Greek stem. It also suggests an inner attitude of homage or respect. It's the same Greek word that's used to describe the Magi when they worship the baby Jesus. Interestingly, in all the times that word is used in the Bible, and as I say, it's the one that's translated the most as worship, used the most. It's only used once in connection with a church meeting in 1 Corinthians. And there it's used to describe the conversion of a non-Christian coming to faith. The second Greek word speaks of the duties performed, the service before God. Jewish priests and the angels are described as serving or worshipping God by use of that word. This word is only used once in the New Testament to speak of something that happens in a church meeting. And there it probably refers to prayer. Third one, that word means respect or reverence that human beings show towards God. The most common usage is in connection with Gentile God-fearers participating in general synagogue life. New Testament also uses that word to describe religious activities, but it's only used once to describe what Christians do when they meet together. Fourth Greek word that's used to mean worship means obedience or adoration. And it's used to speak of the adoration offered to God in heaven and the temple worship of the Jews. It's also used to describe God's missionary work. And when Jesus describes the predicted persecution of Christians, it's that word he uses. More widely, the word is used to describe Christians serving God with their whole lives. The offering of our bodies to God as a spiritual act of worship. This brief look at the worship language of the New Testament makes it clear that worship, according to Scripture, involves all of our lives. Whereas we tend to restrict that terminology, worship, to what we do when we meet together as Christians. The Bible doesn't place that restriction on it. The Bible's emphasis is on our wider worship, beyond just what we do as a fellowship. I want to turn and have a look now in a little more detail at what our response to God, what the Bible tells us that requires. In verse 1 of Romans chapter 12 says, "Therefore, I urge you, brothers, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as living sacrifices, holy and pleasing to God. This is your spiritual act of worship." Paul's letter to the Romans reaches a pivot point in chapter 12. Chapters 1 to 11 focus on what God has done for sinful man. Chapters 12 to 15 shift that focus to focus on what our response should be to that which God has done for us. Paul is essentially saying, God has done so very much for you. Now live for him. He sums up all that God has done for us in that verse in 2 words: God's mercy. This is central to our worship, having an appreciation and understanding of God's mercy. If you are not gripped by the mercy that God has given you, how are you going to worship? An understanding of God's mercy towards us is a fuel that empowers and energizes our worship in all parts of our lives. We looked at the mercy of God in our first talk today when we saw the clip from Les Miserables. Paul is essentially saying here, we have robbed God. He has given us everything, and we have robbed him of the praise, the obedience, the love that he alone deserves. We've put other things before him. Despite all that, he offers us forgiveness and the possibility of being united with him forever. Our response in view of God's mercy, our worship, Paul tells us, should be to offer our bodies as living sacrifices. So, worship requires a remembrance of God's mercy. Secondly, worship also requires an offering of our body to God. We saw 2 weeks ago when we looked in the days before Christ, God called people to bring animal sacrifices to the temple. These sacrifices were only ever intended to be temporary and pointed towards the coming Christ. And we looked a couple of weeks ago at exactly how Christ fulfilled that in every little detail. The 7 occasions that he shed his blood and the 7 times that blood was sprinkled in the Levitical sacrifice. So we no longer offer a sacrifice to be right with God. Christ has done all that is necessary to achieve that. We are justified, made righteous by our faith in him. We are perfect in God's sight because of what he did for us. But there is still a sacrifice that we are called upon to offer: the sacrifice of ourselves. I suppose essentially what Paul is saying is, don't bring a sacrifice, be one. In response to God's mercy, offer your body to him. That's the kind of sacrifice God wants. Not a goat or a lamb or a dove, but yourself, myself. Paul says that such a sacrifice is holy and pleasing to him and is your spiritual act of worship. The Greek word that is translated here as spiritual is logikos, meaning reasonable or rational, which suggests that our worship is connected to the mind as well. That's important. In many other religions, in many Eastern religions, The aim is to encounter the divine on a sub-rational level. In Eastern religions, you're encouraged to switch your mind off with the help of body exercises and mantras, etc., to get in touch with the divine by submerging your consciousness. But our Christian worship has to involve thinking, because what does it begin with? It begins with what God has done for us in Christ. Our worship is a response to what we understand of the mercy of God. If our mind is switched off, we break that connection with the truth that prompts our very worship. Paul's use of the word body also tells us that worship is not purely intellectual or mental. It's also about what we do with our bodies as we offer it, not to ourselves, but to God in His service. So our worship is about what we say with our tongue. It's about what we watch with our eyes. It's about where we go with our feet. I suppose in a sense the kind of worship Paul's talking about here has to do with recognizing that actually we do not belong to ourselves anymore. Christ gave up His very self for us. And in grateful, loving response, we are called to offer ourselves to Him. And that's challenging. But if we are never challenged, we never grow. I wonder if we have actually taken the time to say to God, as we sang in that song this morning, "Here I am, wholly available. Use me to your glory. Every part of my life." To give ourselves fully to Him. Because that's what the Bible calls for us to do. To offer our whole selves in worship to Him. Thirdly, worship requires obedience to God in all parts of our life. Paul goes on in verse 2 to spell out what giving our bodies as living sacrifices means. Do not conform any longer to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you will be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. If we're to worship God properly, we need to be prepared to stand out from the crowd, to be different. And that's not easy. The English Bible scholar and translator John Bertram Phillips translates this verse slightly differently. He translates it as, "Don't let the world squeeze you into its own mold, but let God remold you from within." That isn't easy. Turning up to church on a Sunday and singing with great gusto, "All to Jesus I surrender," or "I will offer up my life in spirit and truth," that's easy enough. But worship is perhaps not quite that easy on a Monday morning or on a Saturday evening when you're surrounded by friends and colleagues who have no desire for God's way of life. And I'm sure we've all met challenges like that where we stand out from the crowd. Sometimes doing what is right for God is going to mean you stand out from the crowd. But you know what? You may feel you stand there alone, but God stands there with you. He promises us that. We are called to be in the world, but not of the world. Our worship is not only about our worship together as a fellowship here, although that's part of it. It's about so much more. It's about how we conduct ourselves in the rest of the week, how we worship God through our daily lives and living. It's about how we worship God through the bad times as well as the good. And life is not a bed of roses. And God never said it would be. But he did say, I will never leave you or forsake you. In preparing for this message today, I came across an interesting quote about worship, which I'd like to share. To say I'm going to church to worship is about as silly as saying I'm going off to bed to breathe for a while. Now, that's not to say that what we do when we come together is not important. Of course it is. It's part of our worship. But that word part's important. It's part of it. We were created to worship God. And that should be as common, as natural as our breathing. It should permeate throughout every aspect of our lives. Why? Because of his great mercy shown to us. Because of the price he paid to redeem us. To give us peace with God. He is worthy of our response, our worship, our living sacrifice. As we go forward into the week ahead, perhaps we can take the opportunity to keep God's mercy towards us central in our minds and worship him as living sacrifices in all parts of our lives. Billy Graham's wife, Ruth Graham, used to have a card stuck on the wall above her kitchen sink that read, "Divine worship offered here." Perhaps those are words we could all echo as we go to the office, the shop, our work, do the ironing, walk the dog, go out to a party. Whatever we do, so that we can truly become a people who worship our God in spirit and in truth, and that we can truly become living sacrifices to him. What a difference that would make to our lives, to our world. Amen.